Your performance is not good. You must be incompetent, just so you know. My husband is doing well with his promotions, now earning $300,000 a year. What about you? Barely making $50,000, I suppose. Please refrain from speaking ill of my husband. I showed my anger. My sister-in-law Lillian said in a mocking tone, "Did I hit a nerve?" "I'm sorry, it's just the truth, and that's why you're upset. My family is wealthy, and I just can't understand the feeling of poor people like you. Oh, by the way, invite us over sometime. I'm curious to see how poor people like you live." My husband looked Lillian in the eye and replied with a smile, "All right then. I understand if that's how you feel. We'll invite you. I'm Helen, 30 years old, a working mother in my second year of marriage, currently pregnant. I switched to remote work after discussing it with my boss. Working from home, my husband James was my classmate in college, quiet and reserved but with a strong heart. I found myself unable to look away from him. We got closer after working together on the executive committee for a cultural festival and started dating. Our relationship smoothly continued without any major arguments, and he proposed when I was 28. With James's parents having passed away in an accident a few years ago, I moved into his parents' house where he was living alone. His elder sister Gladys, a year senior, was a busy car park worker living abroad on a long business trip. She recently returned home and started living with us in the parents' house. Gladys is a straightforward and caring person. James and Gladys, both busy with work, left most of the household chores to me, but they were considerate and helped whenever they could. Balancing work and home life was tough, but not overly so. One holiday, as the three of us cleaned the house and did laundry, I took a break in the now tidy room when James's phone rang. Unexpectedly, there seemed to be some trouble at work, and he hurriedly got ready to leave. As I saw him off at the door, James said with a worried look, "Helen, I'm sorry I can't go with you today. Call me if anything happens. Don't overdo it." We had planned to go to my parents' house today with some grapes given by James's boss. "It's okay. Be careful yourself." "Bye," I replied cheerfully, and James left for work with a look of sadness. Since my pregnancy, James has become overly worried. Originally, I planned to return to the office after the stable period, but James strongly opposed it, so I continued working from home. Even today while cleaning, watch out for that step. "I'll take care of the rest, Helen," he was fussing over me. It seemed things would get even more challenging once the baby arrived. Thinking this, I went back to the living room where Gladys spoke up. "I've always thought this, but James is quite the worrier, isn't he?" "Yes, he is. I can imagine him telling our grown-up child to be home before dark," I said with a troubled smile, and Gladys laughed. "I doubt that. They won't be small forever." When I was late from overtime, he came to pick me up from work, said it was getting dark and dangerous. I shared, and Gladys replied with a wry smile, "Really? That's not just worrying, that's overprotective. Must be tough for you, Helen." "Oh, I'm planning to make a fruit toast later. Let's eat it together." Gladys loved baking, and her skills were professional grade. Her desserts were delicate, beautiful, and most importantly, delicious. I had become a fan of Gladys's sweets. "Thank you, I'm looking forward to it," I said. Being married to a kind husband and having a good relationship with Gladys, everything seemed perfect, but even I had my worries. "I'm home, Helen. I thought you would come with your husband today." "You're alone?" I had brought the grapes to share with my parents. Visiting their home alone, I was greeted by another sister-in-law, Lillian. "Lillian, you're here too." My husband had to work due to a call from his company. "Your husband works for some small unknown company, right? Leaving his pregnant wife alone on a holiday to work? You must be having a hard time, plus living with your husband's sister in his family home." I couldn't stand it. I felt irritated by her condescending tone, but replied calmly, "That's not true at all. My sister-in-law is a wonderful person, and she treats me very well. We all support each other and live harmoniously. No need to pretend. It must be miserable having to live cautiously in your in-laws' house because of a husband who doesn't earn much," she said. "My brother and sister-in-law got married just 6 months ago. Albert, who works for a famous top-tier company, fell in love with Lillian, a colleague, and married her. Looking back, she seemed to have disliked me from our first meeting. The first time I met Lillian, when Albert left the table for a moment, she said, 'Nice to meet you, Helen. Albert often talks about you. Which company do you work for?' Just so you know, I work at the same famous company as Albert." "Really? That's impressive. I'm not as talented as Albert, so I don't work for a famous company," I responded. Lillian looked down on me and said, "I see. Albert always praised you, but it seems you're not that special after all." Since then, Lillian seemed to have deemed me beneath her. She acted normally in front of my parents or Albert, but when we were alone, she became mean-spirited. I found Lillian difficult to deal with, but since we lived apart and rarely met, I tried not to let it bother me. One day, I visited the hospital with James to see our grandmother. She had been hospitalized 4 months earlier due to health issues. Busy with work, we hadn't been able to visit, but finally made it this time. "Grandmother, it's been a while. Sorry we couldn't visit sooner. Work has been busy," we greeted her. Grandmother smiled kindly and said, "Don't worry about it. You're busy with work. It can't be helped. Thank you for coming today. I'm so happy to see you both. My medication is working well, and I've been feeling great. I can even eat my favorite chicken now. Just don't eat too much," I said with concern. Grandmother laughed. After chatting for a while, she seemed a bit tired and sleepy. We promised to visit again and left her room. Grandmother looked well, didn't she? Yeah, that was good to see. James and I were walking to the parking lot, discussing this when a voice suddenly called from behind. "Oh, Helen, what a coincidence." I turned around with a sense of dread and saw Lillian approaching with a malicious smile. "So you came to visit grandmother. She often says she wants to see her family. I visit her every week, but I guess you have been too busy with work, Helen. Working so hard yet earning so little, you must be incompetent. Please refrain from speaking ill of my husband," I said, getting angry. Lillian continued in a mocking tone. "Did I hit a nerve?" "I'm sorry, it's just the truth, and that's why you're upset. I can understand the feelings of poor people, coming from a wealthy family myself." I was deeply infuriated by Lillian's gleeful tone. James also looked stern. Looking down at us, Lillian continued, "Oh, invite us to your house next time. I'm curious to see how poor people like you live. I, for one, live in a high-rise in an upscale neighborhood. My husband, the breadwinner, earns $300,000 a year, and I'm a competent employee at the same company as Albert." James asked, surprised, "You work at the same company as Albert?" Lillian boasted, "Yes, unlike you, we are a couple working at a renowned company. Before marriage, my dad bought me anything I wanted, and now I live a lavish life in a luxurious high-rise with my husband earning $300,000. I'm so curious how poor people like you live in dirty places with such meager earnings." Then James, looking straight into Lillian's eyes, answered with a smile, "All right, we'll invite you. I think you'll be surprised." "What do you mean by that? Is your place so old it's like a ruin?" "Can't wait to see." Lillian skipped away, lost in her fanciful thoughts. We exchanged glances and chuckled at her ignorance. Days later, when we picked up Lillian from the station and brought her home, she said in a dissatisfied tone, "This is quite ordinary, not what I expected. Did you clear it up for me? No matter how much you tidy, you'll never reach wealthy people like us." James replied, his face expressing disbelief, but Lillian seemed unconvinced. Well, whatever, but the inside is full of cheap stuff. Show me quickly. I was beyond anger and simply astounded at her childish behavior. Please come in, I said as I opened the front door. Lillian excitedly entered, but soon let out a short scream and stepped back. Why are you here? Well, this is my house. Welcome, I've been waiting for you. Gladys stood at the entrance with a smile. Lillian looked pale as she stared at the smiling Gladys. Lillian, you work at the same company as Albert, right? That means the same company as Gladys? James asked innocently, and Gladys replied with a mischievous smile. Of course I know her. Lillian and her husband are my subordinates, right, Lillian? Gladys smiled sharply. Lillian pulled my arm, stepping outside, and whispered aggressively. I didn't know you lived with the department head. Why didn't you tell me? Lillian asked frantically. I wasn't asked, I replied. Helen, I apologize for everything. Please don't tell the department head. If she finds out. What is it that you don't want me to find out? I suddenly realized that Gladys was standing right behind us, arms crossed, glaring coldly at Lillian. By the way, Lillian, I heard you were hurling terrible insults at James and others, calling them incompetent, mocking people for their income, and speaking such rude words. I didn't know you were this kind of person, Gladys spoke calmly. Lillian turned pale, apologizing and speaking with teary eyes. Manager, I'm terribly sorry for being disrespectful to your family members. I'll be more careful in the future. Please forgive me. Gladys sighed in exasperation and said, You're apologizing to the wrong person. Lillian turned towards us and repeated her apology. It was a hollow apology, unpleasant to listen to, probably just to save face in front of her superior, Gladys. James and I were too astounded to say anything. Do you really feel sorry? You don't seem to be reflecting, I said with a cold expression. Lillian yelled back defensively, I am reflecting. I am apologizing because I realized I did something wrong. You should read the room. It's because of your attitude that. Lillian started to say something mean to me as usual, but she realized her situation mid-sentence. She turned deadly pale and began to sweat profusely. Gladys let out a deep sigh and, with a cold look, said, I am disappointed in you. You're diligent and accurate at work, and I had high hopes, but I didn't know you had such a terrible personality. I'm utterly disgusted. Lillian seemed shocked and just sat down crying. It's just that I was jealous. Albert is so fond of Helen. I just wanted to say something mean, and it felt good, so I couldn't stop. We're not your punching bag, I said, interrupting her. I have to tell Albert about this. Lillian begged in panic, No, don't. Albert might divorce me if he finds out. If it was out of jealousy, maybe Albert would forgive you if you gallantly reflect, James said with a look of disgust, but Lillian just hung her head in shame. Later, we reported everything to Albert. At first, Albert seemed unable to comprehend and was shocked, but his expression gradually turned grim. By the time he understood everything, he was visibly angry. I can't believe you said such terrible things to Helen and others. Do you realize how terrible your actions were? You wouldn't have apologized if the manager wasn't there. You're the worst. I'm so disappointed, Albert yelled at a shrunken Lillian in the corner. Then he turned to my husband and me and apologized quietly. Helen, James, I'm sorry for the trouble caused because I married someone as malicious as Lillian without knowing. Albert is not to blame. If she changes her attitude, we won't mind anymore. We have become family through many marriages, after all. We would rather get along than harass each other, I said. When I said this, Albert and his family expressed their gratitude with happy faces. This is how we reconciled since. Since then, Lillian has stopped mocking and verbally abusing us. It seems that Albert has sternly warned her that if she behaves maliciously towards others again, they will divorce. Lillian now only offers minimal greetings when we meet and remains silent. She seems to be reflecting, and it would be harsh to stir up more trouble. We decided together to let bygones be bygones. However, 2 months later, we received unexpected news. Albert and Lillian had divorced. According to Albert, Lillian had initially behaved well, but she began bragging about her education and family background to junior colleagues at work and behaved maliciously towards them just as she had with us. This led to a junior colleague developing mental health issues, creating a problem in the process. What she did to us somehow spread throughout the company, leading her to be ostracized and working in a very difficult environment. Eventually, she became emotionally unstable and made unbelievable mistakes, ultimately having a breakdown and leaving the company. Now she has returned to her parents' home and is shut away. 2 months later, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy and returned home from the hospital. Now busy with my first experience of parenting, although I constantly felt tired due to lack of sleep, looking at my son made all the fatigue worthwhile. James and Gladys also loved the baby, and our home was filled with happiness. One holiday, Albert came to meet the baby. He hesitantly held my son, deeply moved by his beautiful eyes and warmth. Albert, who had been downcast about his lack of judgment during the divorce, was now earnestly engaged in his work and thriving. My son, held by Albert, looked at him and seemed to fall asleep comfortably. I am very happy to see this.